Hi, my name is Anne Ratchet and I am the owner and producer of Magistry Studios, and today I wanted to talk about the loneliness epidemic. I think most of us have heard about the loneliness epidemic related to media propaganda and various odds and ends reports that are being floated around, but I feel like a lot of people misunderstand the total depth of the medical and socioeconomic side effects that are happening because of this loneliness. A lot of people write it off as you have a lot of opportunities in school in order to make friends, and as you get older, you just run out of time, have different priorities. But I think the topic is way more important than just those little circumstantial, what happens in life type things. So I'd like a moment to sit down and break that down. So, probably a good starting point was 2020, which a lot of people really experience intense loneliness. Happened that the pandemic was right at its start. We were locked in place. Only really means of outside communication was online, and with that, internet was breaking all of the time. So who could know if you were able to get through to anyone? We ended up finding a lot of people turning to games for both escapism and for community. One, the escapism, like, Zelda Breath of the Wild, where people could explore places, find stuff, trigger into those childhood experiences that a lot of adults had been lacking in the fact that they were, stay-at-home mom while also working a full-time job and also doing all of the cleaning, and there were too many dishes. It was really intense and really ridiculous and not a sustainable place for a lot of people. One of the other things that we ended up finding is that a lot of communities end up forming very, very quickly. While most of the time when we're spending time with each other, it's about 1 to 2 hours at a time with various friend groups, usually grabbing happy hour after work before rushing home. So, a good friendship is 1 to 2 hours a week. What we found with these online gaming friendships, playing games like Among Us or Fortnite, is that we were creating a new living room environments where people could just generally hang. So you ended up with, instead of just spending those 1 or 2 hours, these friendships formed really intense really quickly because people were spending 4 to 6 hours with the same group of people for an extended period of time, probably multiple times during the week. So as a result, people who were strangers 2 weeks before ended up becoming some of your closest, most important support systems in just that 2-week span of time. Because if you actually calculated the amount of hours that you had invested, that was multiple months of friendship crammed into 2 weeks. Now, here's one of the difficulties that we ended up finding is that a lot of people were really desperate for this connection and intercommunity, but it wasn't quite what a lot of people needed. I think the best terminology that I've come across is it was described as junk food friendships. Would it sustain you and keep you satisfied? Yes. You would end up feeling sick the next few days because you had too much of not the thing that fully sustained you. So extroverts were hanging out with people and pretending to be extroverted, but the reality is they were not surrounded by a crowd and ending up losing their minds a little bit. And even further from there, we ended up seeing these pretty major developmental stages missed because you had about 3 years before people were able to go back and get some semblance of being back to society. Most people say it's back there, but we're still seeing a lot of lasting damage. Pretty much every single developmental age group ended up missing major developmental milestones. So a lot of social etiquette ended up becoming delayed, and we're still seeing the effects of what that means for young adults going through the college ages, because usually around the age of 16 to 18 is when people start playing around with alcohol. And you can say what you want about childhood alcoholism. It is a thing that is commonly experienced. And without those opportunities to have those young exposures in a slightly more controlled space, They became 21, had full access to alcohol, and none of the safety training. Kind of coming back to the experiences that we've seen of these adventure playgrounds, these very dangerous playgrounds, leading to safer, more productive children versus the very padded ones where kids don't know how to push their limits. So that's just like the outline of what we've seen with the loneliness so far. Pretty much what this has ended up coming is the loneliness we saw there and the loneliness we had seen previously has gotten worse and worse and worse. Why is this important? Because it has huge mental damage. When they've actually broken down and seen studies from what loneliness does to the brain, it presents in the form of random neuronal deletion. Now, neuronal deletion is very common in everyday life. That is how the brain buffers and processes and gets rid of old information in order to make space for new information to come in. It's a way of isolating and cleaning up pathways so you do things more efficiently when it's done intentionally. With the random deletion, you end up with things like brain fog and lethargy and an inability to do things. Does it sound a little bit like long COVID? Because long COVID, one of its mechanisms is the same thing, random neuronal brain deletion. So one of the things I have a major question about that we really have no way to study is how much of the long effects of long COVID are actually from the long COVID and how much of it is from the loneliness that is a side effect of the limited ability from long COVID. Even further than that, we've seen this random brain neuronal deletion coming up in dementia cases. So it's going to be very interesting and probably pretty detrimental to society to see the domino effect as we go down the pipeline of how much early dementia do we see, how much early Alzheimer's do we see, and other things like that, because this is not a thing that is ever expected to be seen in the brain until the age of 60 at the earliest. And now we're seeing it in 20 and 30-year-olds. So we know at this point that the goal is to get out there, get active in community, and generally improve ourselves, improve our social relationship, make our lives better. So then why aren't people doing that? There's a couple of trends that we've seen in events, and the information is still coming in. It's not fully conclusive, but this is what we've seen. In meetup groups, going through meetup.com or through various other organizations where people tend to gather by themselves, hang out, and form their own activity-based communities, you see a peak of those activity groups in January right after resolution. But as the year progresses, people find that they're tired, that they're busy, that scheduling doesn't work out, that, maybe there is something easier to do. And that means that they stop going to events because, having to battle rush hour to go play games on a Monday night or staying home playing Zelda Breath of the Wind. Zelda Breath of the Wind is the easier option, even if forming those connections would have longer lasting effects. We also saw that over the course of 2025 that the economy was dramatically affecting a lot of people with both spending power and also with activity level. For example, one of the statistics that I saw is that Coachella levels were much lower than projected when Coachella is one of the biggest music festivals in the entire country for the entire year, and a lot of places found that they were not meeting their sales expectations. People were spending less, people were spending less time out, people were drinking less alcohol, people were just generally finding other ways to get involved with other things and not engaging in the festival itself, which, at least for me, I found really shocking because historically, when people are dealing with rough economic times, they look for escapism in order to validate their experience, find meaning in life, and further find ways of connecting with people. So how do we merge this gap of you go to an event for the escapism, but then you don't participate in that escapism, or you don't go for as long, and all of that type of stuff? The information is still coming through as things go on. We know that from the disability perspective, going through chronic illness and all of that type of stuff, what we have seen is do it anyway. It doesn't matter if you're tired. It doesn't matter if it's going to take more energy the next day to get out of bed. It's really important to stay as active as possible. This is pretty much the go-to recommendation of advice from pain management specialists. Is it doesn't matter if you are going to be in bed the next day. If you want to go hiking, because if you lose the ability to hike, it's much harder to regain that ability, even if you have major repercussions afterwards. More importantly, like, we do think about the repercussions of, like, I'll be so tired, I'll be dragging at work the next day, but this is part of the healing process, is keeping up ability and then seeing how you can extend ability in a healthy, progressive way. So one of the best ways to get out of depression is to get social anyway, or how I often tell my friends, do it sad. It's okay. You can be there and your friends will enjoy being around with you even when you're not in the best of circumstances. But little by little, you start piecing it together. You burn the time for your body to piece itself back together. It's one of the core tenets of osteopathy, is the body will heal itself if you give the body the ability to heal itself. And then we kind of get to the crux of the entire thing. Why is life so hard? And unfortunately, the answer is because it's designed to be. We have specific people in power who are playing a bunch of psychological warfare games on the entire population in order to maintain control. One of the ways that they maintain control is by playing a confusion game. They're bombarding you with too much news that causes emotional and psychological damage, and as a result, you respond by tuning out and not just looking for escapism, but the biggest competition is defined as nothing. You want to go home and stare at a wall because that is what you are mentally capable of doing. So from there, we see that the telephone effect comes down the pipeline and it starts affecting our gas prices, which means it's more expensive to go out. Gas goes up, so as a result, food prices go up, which means we're eating out less, or just maybe eating less in general because the food prices are legitimately that bad at this point. And it starts affecting every single aspect of our every single day. Kind of weird how loneliness has led to us not being able to eat, and yes, that is the point. The goal of fascism is to tear us apart in order to make it so that we are easier to control. A population that does not unify is much of individuals. This is like what has been the recurrent theme in general, is everyone gets so worried about themselves and only themselves that they stop thinking about what we can do together as a powerhouse. So this is why I think games are important and why I want us to get involved. If we want to improve our daily lives, the first step is organizing and hanging out with friends. It sounds like a very low bar, but this is what has been seen over the years, is if you get engagement, if you get involved, if you make connections and stop trusting in the duplicitous sense that we're not supposed to trust each other, we have the ammunition to start turning our fate around. From there, we can do so much more. And there's lots of options down the pipeline that are going to be coming up, but they're not going to happen if people don't get active in the first place. So unfortunately, similar to the do it sad situation, we have the do it tired. Do it to the best of your ability. It sucks. I know it does. And we have to power through anyway, because otherwise we're not going to be able to have another side on the other side. It's really coming down to crunch time, and so you are voting for the future you are going to live in with both your finances, what you buy from the store, who you buy it from, which store you go to, and also what we do with our time, which is, are we investing in other people, or are we allowing the systems that be take advantage of us? So anyway, that is one of the things that has been walking around in my mind for quite a while at this point, and it feels kind of nice to get it out there and see if anybody else has opinions, thoughts, processes, and in general, like, help me find ways to get involved. Yes, activism is one, but there are so many other ways to get involved in community other than just going to protests. We can get involved in food banks. We can get involved in, I know there's a bunch of gaming-based fundraisers throughout the entire year that raise thousands, if not millions of dollars for different charities. It's about finding the way to get back into community and build out everyone out. If you want to hear more about this or more about what we're doing at Magistry Studios in order to get under all of this, if you want to hear more about games, give this a hype. And I'll see you in the next video.